You landed the interview, the one you have refreshed your inbox for. In the next 30 minutes, one sentence could move you from the yes pile to the no pile, and you will never know it happened. No rejection email explains it. No recruiter calls to tell you which word did it. You get silence, then a templated note saying they went with someone else. I have sat on the other side of that table, in the room where those decisions get made. And today I am walking you through the 10 things you should never say in an interview. Hey, I am Dre. Before this, I spent years inside corporate recruiting, sitting through compensation planning meetings and calibration sessions where hiring managers and HR argue over who moves forward and who gets quietly dropped. I am not here to motivate you. I am here to show you how the machine actually works from the inside. So if this helps you walk into your next interview a little sharper, hit subscribe and turn on the bell because I put a new one of these out every week. A lot of people assume interview rejections come down to experience or qualifications, and sometimes that is true. But in the rooms I have sat in, plenty of strong candidates got quietly filtered out because of something they said, not something they lacked. It is rarely one dramatic mistake. It is usually a small phrase that trips a mental alarm for the person across the table. And once that alarm goes off, everything else you say gets reinterpreted through it. So let's get into the 10 things that trip that alarm, starting with one people don't even realize is a red flag. Number 1, asking what the company actually does. Here is the hidden mechanism. Interviewers use your first 2 minutes as a proxy for how much effort you put in before you showed up. The misconception is that the interviewer will happily walk you through the business, so why bother researching? The insider truth is that if you cannot describe our product or roughly who we compete with, I mentally file you as someone applying to everything without discriminating, and that changes how I listen to your answers. I have watched a candidate with a genuinely strong resume ask what our company actually made and watch the hiring manager's face change in real time. The consequence is that you spend the rest of the interview digging out of a hole you built in the first 90 seconds. The caveat: if the role is highly technical and the company is intentionally low profile, a narrow, clarifying question is fine. But a blanket "what do you guys do" is not. Keep that in mind because the next one trips people up just as fast. Number 2, asking what the role actually involves. The hidden mechanism here is that the job description gets treated as a filter, not just an ad. The misconception is that the interview is where you learn the job for the first time. The insider truth is that I expect you to have read that posting closely enough to ask specific questions, not generic ones. In systems I have worked in, hiring managers often flag candidates who open with, "So what exactly would I be doing here?" because it signals you applied on autopilot. I have seen strong technical candidates lose momentum in the first 5 minutes simply because their opening question made it look like they never opened the posting. The consequence is that the interviewer spends the call re-explaining basics instead of digging into your strengths, and that time never comes back. The caveat: asking about day-to-day priorities or how success gets measured in the first 90 days is completely different and usually welcomed. That distinction matters, so hold on to it as we move to the next one. Number 3, asking about your hours too early. If you are interviewing for an hourly or shift-based role, this is normal and expected. But for a salaried, exempt position, the hidden mechanism is that our questions get quietly translated into a commitment question. Are you going to be here when we need you? The insider truth, in my experience, is that hiring managers often hear it as, "Are you already negotiating how little you can give us?" I have seen candidates with a completely reasonable concern, may be burned by a previous employer who demanded unpaid overtime, get quietly deprioritized because they led with a schedule question instead of a contribution question. The consequence is that you get labeled a clock watcher before anyone has seen your work ethic. The caveat: if you genuinely need clarity, ask about workload during the first 90 days or how the team handles crunch periods. It gets you the same information without raising the alarm. Number 4, leading with promotional opportunities. It is reasonable to want a career path, so this one is about sequencing, not content. The hidden mechanism is that interviewers are gauging whether you actually want this job or whether you are using it as a stepping stone you are already planning to leave. The insider truth is that when career growth becomes your first or second question, it often gets interpreted as you being more interested in your future manager's job than the one on the table. I have sat in calibration meetings where a hiring manager passed on a candidate specifically because the growth questions came before any questions about the actual role. The consequence is that your enthusiasm for the position itself gets quietly discounted. The caveat: asking about growth later, framed around learning and long-term contribution rather than promotion timelines, usually lands fine. That logic carries directly into our next one, which might be the single most sensitive topic on this list. Number 5, asking about salary before we bring it up. I understand the instinct. Your time is valuable, and you do not want to waste it on a role that cannot meet your number. But the hidden mechanism is that most organizations have an internal order of operations for compensation conversations, involving HR, the recruiter, and the hiring manager together, and jumping ahead of that order can read as impatience rather than practicality. The insider truth: in systems I have worked in, is that recruiters are usually the ones authorized to open that conversation, and a candidate who forces it early sometimes gets read as primarily motivated by the paycheck. This may be a signal rather than certainty. Plenty of great hires ask early and still get offers, but it is a risk you do not need to take. The consequence, if it lands badly, is a subtle shift in how invested the interviewer is in advocating for you afterward. The caveat: once you are deep into a second round with the hiring manager, that is usually not the right moment either, since in most structures, the hiring manager rarely has final say on the number anyway. Let that one sit for a second. Because the flip side of this mistake is just as damaging, and it is next on the list. Number 6, dodging the salary expectations question once I actually ask it. This is where the previous point flips. Once I ask you directly, avoiding the number becomes its own red flag. The hidden mechanism is that this question is often used less to pin down a figure and more to test whether you have done basic research on your own market value. The insider truth is that an answer like, "I am not sure, I would have to think about it," usually reads as unpreparedness rather than strategy. I have watched otherwise excellent candidates stumble here because they treated the question as a trap instead of a normal part of the process. The consequence is that it signals you have not thought seriously about your own value, which undercuts everything else you said. The caveat: a well-researched range instead of a single hard number is usually the smartest move, since it shows preparation without boxing yourself in before you know the full offer. Number 7, criticizing your previous company or manager. I understand the pull. Maybe the environment was genuinely difficult, and there is a real temptation to explain exactly why you left. But the hidden mechanism is that interviewers are not evaluating your former employer. They are evaluating how you talk about conflict when you are not in the room, because that is a preview of how you might talk about this company someday. The misconception is that honesty about a bad situation earns sympathy. The insider truth, in my experience, is that it usually earns caution instead. I have seen a candidate deliver a completely accurate, completely justified account of a dysfunctional workplace and still get marked down because the tone read as unresolved rather than reflective. The consequence is that a legitimate grievance gets reframed as a character concern. The caveat: explain why you are leaving honestly. Just frame it around what you are moving toward and what you learned, rather than who wronged you. If you have made it this far, you are already ahead of most people who walk into these rooms without thinking about any of this. So stick with me, because the next 3 quietly cost people offers they were genuinely qualified for. Number 8, announcing how nervous you are. A small amount of nerves is expected, and most interviewers, myself included, build in room for that. The hidden mechanism is that naming your nervousness out loud shifts the interviewer from evaluating your qualifications to managing your emotional state, and that is not a role most interviewers want or have time for. The insider truth is that it sometimes has the opposite effect, especially once you reach the hiring manager stage, where there is often less patience for it than with the recruiter. I have seen candidates open with, "I am so sorry. I am really nervous," and watch the interviewer quietly shift into a more guarded mode for the rest of the conversation. The consequence is that your actual competence gets filtered through a lens of fragility instead of being evaluated on its own. The caveat: if your nerves are visibly affecting you, take a breath or ask for a second to collect your thoughts. That reads as composure, not weakness. Number 9, being too casual. A little warmth is good. It helps build rapport. But there is a line, and crossing it changes how you are perceived almost instantly. The hidden mechanism is that professional language works as a filter for how you might represent the company externally, in emails, with clients, in meetings. The insider truth is that terms like bro or boss can come across as disrespectful rather than relaxed, even when that is nowhere near your intention. I have seen a candidate respond to a serious question with no problem, boss, and watch 2 interviewers exchange a look that had nothing to do with the answer itself. The consequence is that the team starts unconsciously discounting your professionalism regardless of how strong your actual answers are. The caveat: mirroring the interviewer's own tone and the name they introduce themselves with is usually the safest approach. Before I get to the last one, I am curious. Which of these 9 have you actually done without realizing it? Drop the number in the comments, because I read through them, and some of the most common ones still surprise me. Number 10, and this is the one people underestimate the most: not asking any questions at the end. When I ask if you have questions for me, that is not a courtesy. It is a data point. The hidden mechanism is that your questions reveal how you actually think about the role, in a way your rehearsed answers cannot. The misconception is that saying no, "I think you covered everything," shows respect for the interviewer's time. The insider truth is that it usually reads as disengagement, or worse, a lack of genuine interest in whether this role is the right fit for you. I have watched otherwise strong candidates undo 25 minutes of good momentum in the final 60 seconds simply by having nothing prepared to ask. The consequence is that the interview ends on a flat note instead of a confident one, and first and last impressions carry disproportionate weight in how interviewers remember a conversation. The caveat: come with 2 or 3 genuine questions about the team, how success is measured, or what challenges the role is currently facing. So there you have it. 10 things I would think twice about saying in an interview if I were sitting across from you. I want to be clear. None of these will single-handedly sink a strong candidate, and getting one slightly wrong does not mean you are out of the running. What actually shapes a decision is the overall pattern: how prepared you seem, how you handle pressure, and how you talk about yourself and others when the stakes are real. None of this is legal advice, and employment practices vary by state and by company. So if something feels off in a specific interview, that is worth checking against your own situation rather than treating anything here as an absolute rule. The goal is not to walk in reciting a script. It is to walk in aware of how these rooms actually work, so you are not accidentally working against yourself. If this gave you a clearer picture of what happens on the other side of the table, hit subscribe and turn on that bell. Because next week, I am breaking down how to actually answer the salary expectations question we touched on today, without underselling yourself or pricing yourself out. I will see you in the next one.